The priest stood immobile, his eyes locked on the horror unfolding before him. At the door of the old church, he saw it, a vile creature, its shape flickering in the fading light, dragging a woman into the bush. Her screams pierced the night, but the creature moved with unnatural speed, swallowing her cries as it pulled her deeper into the darkness. His heart hammered in his chest, but his body refused to move. He stood frozen, staring, his mind racing. The whispers of the villagers, the warnings of spirits, of shadows that were more than mere stories, they were real. He muttered prayers under his breath, the words barely audible, a feeble attempt to call upon the strength of his faith. But the words felt hollow, swallowed by the weight of the night. The terror in the woman's eyes still lingered before him, even as the creature and its victim vanished into the depths of the bush. The village had been waiting for this moment. And so had he. But as the air grew still again, the priest realized with a sinking heart, his faith alone would not be enough. The priest stepped off the bus, the heat of Lagos pressing against him like an unseen hand. The road ahead was long, dusty, and lined with thick trees, their branches reaching out like twisted fingers. The village lay just beyond the stretch of the road, hidden in the shadows of the darkening forest. It was a place that felt forgotten, as if time had slowed here, leaving it to stew in the weight of its own mysteries. The priest adjusted the collar of his shirt, wiping the sweat from his brow. He had been sent here to strengthen the faith of the villagers, to reassure them that there was no evil that could not be conquered by the light of God. Yet as he looked down the path, his heart beat a little faster. Something in the air felt different, heavy, thick with anticipation. He walked into the village, the streets quiet, almost too quiet. Children ran in the distance, their laughter faint but nervous, like they were playing a game they didn't fully understand. The houses were small, made of wood and clay, some with the roofs sagging under years of neglect. An old woman sat by the well, her eyes flicking up as he passed. "You must be the new priest," she said in a whisper, her voice carrying the weight of something unsaid. "Be careful, Father. The land is not what it seems." He nodded politely, but the warning lingered in the air, hanging there like a cloud. He had heard the rumors, the strange disappearances, the whispers that filled the night air. But in his heart, he believed in the power of his faith. He was here to heal, to bring peace. Nothing could stand against that. The church was old, its stones worn with age. Inside, the scent of incense mixed with the musty air. As he stood before the altar, he closed his eyes, reciting the familiar prayers. Yet, as the words left his lips, something shifted in the room. The silence felt unnatural, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something. The door creaked open behind him, and the priest turned. A man stood in the doorway, his face etched with years of hardship. His clothes were simple, worn, but his eyes were sharp, almost too knowing. "You've come to save us," the man said, his voice heavy with suspicion. "But not everything can be saved, Father. Not everything is worth saving." The priest opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. The man's gaze seemed to pierce through him, as though he could see into the very depths of his soul. "Good luck, Father," the man said, before turning and disappearing into the shadows. The priest stood still, the air around him thick with an unease he couldn't explain. He had come to heal, to guide, but already he sensed that his greatest challenge would not be the faith of these people, but the darkness that clung to the land itself. The sun was long gone, and the village had fallen into an unnatural stillness. The priest sat alone in the small room they had given him, a single candle flickering faintly on the table. The air felt heavier than before, like something was pressing against him from all sides. Outside, the sounds of the village, faint voices, the occasional clink of metal, began to fade as the night deepened. A soft, mournful cry reached his ears. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, the wind playing tricks, but then it came again, clearer this time. A woman's cry, distant but full of pain. The priest froze, heart hammering in his chest. His hand reached out instinctively, gripping the edge of the table, the wood digging into his palms. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a cry for mercy. The priest rushed to the door, throwing it open with a sudden urgency that startled him. The village square was empty, the faint light of the moon casting long shadows across the ground. The cry echoed once more, cutting through the night like a blade. Without thinking, he stepped into the cold air, his breath visible in the stillness. The sound was coming from the forest, deep beyond the edge of the village, where the trees whispered their ancient secrets. The priest hesitated, torn between fear and duty. He muttered a prayer under his breath, the words coming out too quickly, like he was begging for strength. The cries continued, louder now, urgent and frantic. He couldn't ignore it. With his heart pounding, he stepped into the forest, the ground soft beneath his boots. His eyes strained against the dark, the moonlight barely piercing the dense canopy above. The cries grew louder with each step, and the further he went, the colder the air became. Then, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that presses on your ears. The priest paused, breath shallow. He strained his ears, hoping for another cry, but all he could hear was the soft rustling of leaves. And then, movement. A shadow flitted between the trees. The priest's pulse quickened. There, just ahead, something shifted, too fast, too unnatural. He caught his breath. A twisted figure emerged from the underbrush, dragging a body behind it. The woman was limp, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide open but empty. The creature's form was a blur of darkness, its limbs long and grotesque, moving in an eerie, fluid motion. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The creature paused, turning its gaze toward him. The priest's blood ran cold as the eyes of the beast locked onto his. The priest took a step back, but the creature was gone before he could blink, vanishing into the trees as swiftly as it had appeared. The woman's body, still and lifeless, was left in the shadows. The priest stood motionless, his heart beating in his throat. This wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a spirit. It was something else. Something much worse. The priest spent the rest of the night pacing in his room, his thoughts as tangled as the shadows that stretched across the village. The creature, the dragging of the woman's body, it replayed in his mind like a haunting refrain. He had told himself he would come to save the village, to cast out whatever evil had taken root. But now, standing on the threshold of this dark truth, he wondered if he had come too late. The sun had barely risen when he made his way to the village square the next morning. The air was thick, the oppressive silence still hanging in the air, but there was something else now. Something different. The villagers moved about, their faces drawn, eyes avoiding his gaze. He could feel the weight of their fear, like a wall he couldn't push through. No one spoke of the night's events, yet the tension in the air was palpable. The woman who had disappeared was gone. The body was no longer in the clearing where he had last seen it. He tried to seek answers, to find someone who would speak of what had happened, but they turned their faces away, offering nothing but silence. The village elder, Ajadai, appeared before him. His stooped form seemed to materialize out of the mist as the priest turned a corner. The old man's eyes were narrowed, his face unreadable, as if the weight of 1,000 secrets rested on his shoulders. "You've seen it," Ajadai said, his voice low, hoarse. "The creature. The one who haunts these woods." The priest nodded, but words caught in his throat. The terror he had felt last night had not subsided, but it had shifted, deepened. "The spirits, they don't lie," Ajadai continued, glancing over his shoulder as if checking for unseen ears. "But the truth is worse than anything you've heard. Worse than anything you can imagine." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It is not just a creature, Father. It is a curse. And that curse is tied to you." The priest recoiled, confused. "To me? What are you talking about?" Ajadai's eyes darkened. It has been waiting for the right blood. For your blood. The blood of those who once helped seal her away. The words hit him like a blow. The priest staggered back, his breath coming in short gasps. I don't understand. Ajudai didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured toward the church in the distance, as though seeking refuge in its stone walls. You will. Soon enough. But for now, Father, you must listen. The Queen, she is awake. And the village is caught in the web of her return. The priest stood still, the weight of Ajudai's words sinking in. A curse. Tied to his bloodline. He had come here to guide them, to offer salvation, but now it seemed salvation itself was slipping further out of reach. Ajudai continued, his voice growing weaker. You must act quickly, Father. For if you don't, the creature will return. And next time, it will not be a woman it drags into the dark. Before the priest could speak, Ajudai turned and shuffled away, leaving him standing in the village square, lost in a sea of uncertainty. The sun was high now, but its light felt dim, as though something had already begun to obscure it. The priest looked around, at the villagers who went about their lives as though nothing had changed. The woman was gone. The creature still lurked. And the village, it seemed, was already forgotten by the world. But the priest knew something far worse was coming. He could feel it, deep in his bones. The land itself had awoken, and the darkness was gathering strength. There was no turning back now. The priest spent the next few days in the church, poring over his texts, trying to make sense of what Ajudai had said. The ancient writings, the prayers, the rituals, all seemed so far removed from the danger he was now facing. The more he studied, the more he realized that none of it was enough. The creature in the woods, the woman dragged to her death, it wasn't just an apparition. It was something older, something that had waited for centuries to return. He had come to this village to offer salvation. Now, it seemed the only salvation left was to confront the very darkness that had been hiding beneath the soil for so long. The sun was sinking low when Ajudai came to him again, his face pale and drawn as though the weight of the village's history was finally taking its toll. He had been avoiding the priest for days, but now, the time had come. You've seen it now, Ajudai said, his voice low. You've felt it. The curse is awakening, and you cannot stop it with prayers alone. The priest nodded, the truth settling heavy on his chest. What must I do? Ajudai hesitated, then motioned for the priest to follow him. They walked together, the sound of their footsteps the only noise in the deepening twilight. As they passed the village square, Ajudai spoke in whispers, as though the land itself might overhear. The queen, the creature you saw, is no mere monster. She was once a guardian, a protector of the village, bound by your ancestors. The curse that keeps her imprisoned is tied to blood, blood from your own line. The priest's heart sank. My blood? Yes. Your ancestors helped seal her away, but their actions were born of selfishness. They thought they could control her power, take it for themselves. The curse they placed on her was never meant to be broken. But now, it is. Ajudai stopped in front of an old, overgrown shrine, hidden behind a thick curtain of vines. It had once been a place of reverence, but now, it was forgotten, barely remembered by the villagers. The air around the shrine felt heavy, as though the land itself was holding its breath. This is where it began, Ajudai said. The queen was sealed here, in the earth itself. But to truly destroy her, to keep her from rising again, a final ritual must be performed. One that can only be completed by someone of your blood. The priest looked at the shrine, the weight of Ajudai's words pressing down on him. What must I do? Ajudai's eyes darkened. You must call her back. Bring her to the shrine. And then, you must sacrifice the blood of your own line. It will be the only way to bind her to the earth again, to end the curse once and for all. The priest's breath caught in his throat. The idea of sacrificing his own blood, his very existence, to end the evil was almost unthinkable. But as Ajudai's eyes met his, the priest realized that there was no other choice. He was the last link to the past, the last hope of the village. And if he did not act, the evil would consume them all. The priest stood in the moonlight, his heart pounding in his chest. The words Ajudai had spoken echoed in his mind, but he couldn't bring himself to believe them. The curse, the bloodline, the queen, it all sounded like madness. No, he muttered to himself, shaking his head as if trying to rid himself of the idea. This cannot be true. Only God has supreme power. Not some ancient curse. Ajudai's voice, low and filled with the weight of centuries, filled the silence around them. But Father, you must understand. The land is bound to this evil. Your bloodline. The priest cut him off, his words sharp, his face set with unshakable conviction. I don't care about bloodlines. I don't care about any godforsaken creature. Only God has the power to save us. And if this deity you speak of, this thing in the woods, thinks it has any power over me or this village, it can go to hell. Ajudai recoiled, his eyes wide with disbelief. Father, you misunderstand. You cannot fight this with mere words. This is not about belief. It is about what has already been written. What has already been done. The priest's fists clenched, his mind spinning with a mixture of fear and anger. He took a step forward, his voice rising. I came here to help these people, not to be told I am some kind of key to this madness. I am a servant of God, and I will not bow to some dark power. Ajudai's face hardened. You will see, Father. This is not something you can pray away. It will come for you, and it will come for them. The priest turned away, his heart racing. He wanted to believe Ajudai, to understand what the elder was saying, but the weight of it was too much. The creature, the curse, it was beyond his comprehension. All he could hold on to now was his faith, even if that faith felt like a fragile thread. As he walked away, Ajudai's voice followed him. Remember, Father, only the blood of your own can break the seal. The forest was silent, the night air heavy with the scent of damp earth. The priest stood at the edge of the clearing, his heart steady but his soul on fire. Before him, the shadow of the creature, the vampire queen, emerged from the darkness, its twisted form flickering like a nightmare brought to life. The land itself seemed to pulse with her presence, the air thick with an ancient power that threatened to suffocate him. But the priest was no longer afraid. The fear that had gripped him so tightly in the days before was gone, replaced by something far stronger, the unwavering certainty of his faith. He stepped forward, his voice rising in prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, he began, his words steady and clear, cutting through the silence like a blade. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The vampire queen paused, her eyes locking onto him. There was no malice in her gaze, only the cold emptiness of something ancient, a creature that had been forgotten for too long. But in that moment, the priest could feel the weight of her evil, pressing against him. She was testing him, pushing him to doubt, to break. But he did not falter. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. The queen moved closer, her form a blur of darkness, but the priest held his ground. Lead us not into temptation, he continued, his voice strong now, echoing through the clearing. But deliver us from evil. The ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble, the trees groaning with the weight of the curse that had bound them. But the priest did not waver. His prayer was a shield, a weapon forged from his deepest beliefs. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. As he finished the prayer, the vampire queen let out a shriek, a sound that rattled the very bones of the earth. She lunged at him, her claws outstretched, but the priest stood firm, raising his hands toward the sky. He called out with all the strength of his soul, his words now a command. In the name of the Almighty God, I cast you out. I command you to return to the darkness from which you came. You have no power here, for the power of God is supreme. The earth beneath them shook violently, and the sky above seemed to crack, lightning flashing in the distance. The vampire queen recoiled, her form flickering and fading like a dying flame. But the priest did not stop. By the blood of Christ, I cast you out. You are nothing before the Lord's might. Be gone. With one final, deafening scream, the queen vanished, leaving only silence in her wake. The priest stood alone in the clearing, his breath ragged but his spirit unbroken. The power of God had been tested, but it had not faltered. The darkness had been driven back. The land was quiet now, the weight of the curse lifted. The priest lowered his hands, his heart still thundering in his chest. He had not broken. His faith had conquered. And the village, for now, was safe. The night after the battle was the quietest the village had ever known. The air felt lighter, as though the weight that had pressed against the land for so long had finally been lifted. The priest sat at the edge of the church, his hands clasped in his lap, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The victory was not his alone. It had been the power of God, unwavering and supreme, that had driven back the darkness. The village was still, the people hesitant as they went about their tasks, as if waiting for something to shift. The terror that had gripped them for so long had not fully receded. The evil had been defeated, but the scars remained. It was only when the village elder, Ajidai, approached him the next morning that the true nature of the change began to unfold. "Father," Ajidai said quietly, his voice filled with a reverence that the priest had not heard before, "we have seen the power of God. We have seen what true faith can do. And we know now that we cannot stand alone any longer. The darkness that once held us captive is gone, but we must fill the void with light." Dear viewers, no power is greater than the power of the Almighty God. Trust in God and He will make your faith move mountain.